Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the manifestos we've seen. The PTI's manifesto also come out today. We'll be talking about the economic side, which seems to be one of the main issues for the country at this time and also for the voter as we all prepare to vote on February 8th. As far as the PMLN is concerned, of course, there's a cautious optimism that is exhibited in their manifesto. If we look at it, it's cautious, yet it plans a gradual increase in the GDP. It talks about bringing inflation down to single digits by 2025. As far as the PPP is concerned, it seems to be more about what they're calling Chuno Nayi Soch Ko. And it seems to be addressing poverty, unemployment, inflation, but it also talks about doubling the economy, the income, the real income of wage earners, and talks about prioritizing growth. It talks about prioritizing investments, job creation, but it's unclear how it plans on doing these things. As far as the PTI's manifesto is concerned, again, it is quite extensive, but the real question is it implementable, and does the party have the kind of team that will be needed to bring about these initiatives, to bring about these changes that they talk about in their manifesto? All of that today on Perspective. A little later on, we'll also be talking about the election preps and, of course, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's constant jibes at PMLN. The response we've also seen the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab give to that a little bit later on, that side of politics. I have with me today Dr. Khaqan, Hassan, Najeeb, who's an economist. Thank you for being with us today. We also have Usman Chohan, who is an economist. Thank you for being with us. Faraz Ali Khan, who is a political analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Before I go to the guests in the studio, I'm going to go to Dr. Khaqan. Dr. Khaqan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Dr. Khaqan, we've spoken about economy now and again on the program. How overall, what do you feel when you look at the manifestos of these three political parties? Let's start off with that.
So they have all talked about inflation, which is probably something that affects the lives of every person in Pakistan. So, for example, PMLN wants to bring it to single digits in the coming years. They have talked about Pakistan's energy sector. There is talk of some free units. There is talk of some, reduction to 20 to 30%. Again, PMLN is on the reduction side, whereas People's Party talks about having free units to 300 people. Then we've talked about the current account, in which they think they want to restrict current account to about 1.5%. The growth, everyone feels, is on the slower side in the first couple of years, and then it gradually picks up. And then also, when they've talked about Pakistan's fiscal performance, they want to increase the tax base. For example, PMLN talks about taking the tax base to 13% of GDP, which currently is 9%. So that would mean nearly 0.7 or 0.8% of GDP increase every year, which itself is on the ambitious side, given the fact that that would mean new taxation or enforcement. So if you look at all these areas,
I'm going to interject. When you look at these manifestos of these, of the major political parties, first of all, from what you've said, I gather there is a cognizance, of course, that is very welcoming, that for the common man at this time, the biggest challenge is perhaps inflation. And that is, of course, welcome. But on the other hand, when you look at, of course, the continuation of the IMF program, the continuation of economic policies, of course, the interruption of it that we've spoken about before also, which party do you think is perhaps, most realistic when you talk about, the initiatives that they're speaking about as far as economy, inflation, and those real details are concerned?
Mahrukh, I'm really glad you literally took the words out of my mouth, which were that none of them have clearly defined what the route would be with the IMF. Whereas I am very clear, I have always said in your program, Pakistan's economy cannot be run without the IMF support, given the gross external financing needs of Pakistan, which for this current fiscal year are $25 billion. And you can almost say that for the next 3 years, they remain to be about $25 billion. But
Okay.
none of the manifestos, as much as I've had a chance to go through it, or what I've heard on the media and through the other economists one has spoken to, have noticed that none of them clearly come out and say that we will finish the current standby arrangement and transit into a new program. I think that is
Okay.
something maybe they can, when you guys ask them questions, they can be more clear about it. I'm
Okay.
absolutely certain that Pakistan's continued macro stability, which we have achieved, which I say we are in the nascent phase of a macro stability framework that we are trying to build, cannot be undone by not going to the IMF. So I think that's something that there is less clarity on. Some of the energy sector, for example, the concern is heightened, right? So that's the good part. But the depth of surgery, beyond reducing the electricity cost, I think they would have to either build and show to us, either before the Feb elections or going into March once they take power, where the privatization would happen, where the tariff regime would change, how the subsidy would become targeted. So there is a lot more meat that needs to be there. On the
Okay.
inflation side also, right?
Okay.
Sorry, one thing I forgot, I'll come to inflation. The others is to everyone believes that export is the way forward. And, let's say they want to double exports in nominal terms to $60 billion. But really, exports is about competitiveness of the economy. Exports is about reducing cost of production. Exports is about our connectivity to the world, our, engaging with the world, taking on GVCs in the world. But none of them, the menu that they put forward is not to the depth that how this would be achieved. Remember that,
Fair enough.
we've
Let me
hovered
let me
around
come
$28
back to you
billion.
on that, Dr. Khaqan.
Yeah.
I'll come back to you on that. I'm going to go to Usman Chohan Sahab here. Usman Sahab, how, when we talk about manifestos, what Dr. Khaqan is saying, the detail of it, how practical is it to have that kind of detail in manifestos? Isn't it a lot of, at least some part of it, not a lot, is about politicking, no?
Well said. You know that manifestos are aspirational to a large extent, but the more grounding in reality they have, the more they will be able to persuade the key stakeholders. And one stakeholder that you have mentioned correctly is the IMF. The standby agreement with the IMF determines the trajectory of our economic recovery. So if we put ourselves in the position of an IMF official looking at these manifestos and then seeing how they would cohere with the standby agreement stipulations, I think that the IMF official would find these manifestos hilarious. He would find them hilarious because they are making promises, one party in particular more than others, that would be catastrophic for the fiscal deficit as well as for the overall fiscal stability.
Do you think the PMLN's manifesto is perhaps more realistic than other parties?
It is, because it is more grounded in short-term austerity, which makes sense. The PTI also does a very good job of highlighting the austerity. But the targets that the PML has set out 4 or 5 years into the future may not be achievable, and so the realism is only insofar as they're modest in the short term. But for the longer term, I think that neither the PPP nor the PML have got it together because of the inflation peak that they envisage, as well as the stimulus that they imply that they will do. It's absolutely hilarious.
But as do you agree with what Usman Sahab is saying? And also, of course, we've, as far as, for example, the PTI government, last government was concerned, there was, some promises that had been made. It seemed that there was a competency of what the team that had been put in place to implement them, to actually bring about the changes that they talk about, that they envisage as a political party. And then, invariably there is that argument that we didn't know how bad it was, or, there is, the situation at the time when these promises are made is perhaps not known to the extent the damage is not known, and that comes into play. Do you see that kind of situation again panning out?
Well, Mahrukh, so to start with, just like Dr. Usman said, manifestos in Pakistan unfortunately are wishful thinkings. That's because of the reason that major voter that comes that they come from a very uneducated areas, and 90% of the voters might not even know what manifesto means. So therefore, all those manifestos are filled with 300 free units and 3 million houses, 10 million jobs. These are all the slogans that a common man wants to listen. This is what we call giving them hope. Now talking about reality-based things. So
giving them hope. I want to talk about this. Do you think that these manifestos are giving people hope?
these are shallow hopes.
But
They can't be filled out. They can never be filled out. One very important thing that none of these manifestos deal with, the ground reality is the inflation in Pakistan is linked with the international market now.
I think
It goes with the international market, and there are so many wars going around, and none of the parties taking that into account.
One of the things that I think Bilawals Zardari, when he was asked about the 300 free units of electricity, I think he said was, do you not want us to dream? Do you think that the manifestos are largely dream-based?
You know, the good thing about PMLN is, you said it's more realistic based. If you go back around 6-7 months ago, Maryam Bibi and Shehbaz Sharif had this vision of giving 200 free units back in July, I guess, when they started campaigning and all, building up the election campaigns. But now with their manifesto out there, the 200 units promise has disappeared. That means they still have sort of a realization that it's not possible.
So do you think that, you know, for example, let me go to Dr. Khaqan again. Dr. Khaqan, do you think that the PMLN, for example, is a party preparing to delve into the business of running government, and therefore they are perhaps more cautious than other political parties when making promises?
I think you know, every party wants to come to office, take the Prime Minister's office, and, you know, form government. But having said that, I think everyone's trying to touch the pulse of people. And, you know, for example, everyone's talking about creation of new jobs. And now that's a must. Everyone, you know, wants to have children find jobs once they go to school, or once they go to college, or once they go to a technical school. So they're trying to touch on every aspect. I think it's the deeper part, how to get it done. And you yourself kept mentioning, and that's the most important part, right? What is the team that is going to even deliver on these promises, even though not to a full extent? I mean, trying to create 2 million jobs in Pakistan makes the you know, 10 million target that, for example, PMLN has put to us. Now, that won't be easy. That requires about 5 to 6% growth every year, and that too, you know, growth in agriculture and manufacturing, because that's where the jobs are created. Now, if you are going to have the 5 to 6% growth in the outer years, then, you know, that's you know, it's probably not going to do it. Something that I really liked in the manifesto is that people have started talking about population, you know. So, you know, I commend the parties for talking about population. It's become a central subject.
And also climate damage. I think that's also a very, very important part. And I think that the parties are cognizant of these realities. And that is also reflected in the manifestos.
So, you know, just beyond, you know, critically evaluating them, they've put most of the subjects together. They've tried to be more, you know, less optimistic maybe on the kind of things that we can deliver in the next 5 years. But the depth on the energy sector, the depth on how to get to 13% of GDP, the depth on how to make electricity units free, or make, you know, where to find the money, you know, all those things. Either they should do and present to us. And here, I think the people have now become quite, you know, intelligent in Pakistan. I don't know what the English word for
I want to talk about this. When Faraz Sahab here says that, you know, it's a large chunk, or, you know, I think 90% was his statistic, that it's not, people don't even know what manifestos are. Do you think that is still true, or do you think that if people are now, you know, their last experience with a government like the PTI, for example, you know, and with 10 lakh homes, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of a promise, that kind of a dream again, which was never realized, you know, perhaps, you know, there are people, a lot of the people want there to be the kind of goals that will actually translate. A lot of those heartbroken people, I don't want to be too emotional, but I think that, you know, there is something there, no?
So here's my take. That Urdu word shaur, or maybe the English version is wisdom. I think there is general wisdom that Pakistan has not done well over the last few decades on a number of issues, whether that's, improving our agriculture productivity, because they produce. So they know that farm to market roads are weak. So a lot of their produce gets wasted. So, they know that work on, trains needs to be done in Pakistan. What I'm trying to say is that barring the fact how much depth of knowledge they have, the basic understanding I think is there. If there is no sanitation in a
And has
rural area,
perhaps increased over time.
of course. I mean, you got to remember, this is the digital media age. Everyone's carrying a phone, and media connectivity. Look at the number of channels that have erupted, and maybe a lot of it is creating just news and not in-depth discussion. Maybe that's true, but at least that news travels. So what one's trying to say is that all political parties have carried their manifestos with a lot of breadth. They've tried to cover enough.
Dr. Khaqan, I think there's a problem with audio. Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Usman Sahab here. Usman Sahab, you heard what Dr. Khaqan is saying. When we talk about what we can sell to the people, perhaps that also has changed over time. What we can now say to the people is perhaps not something that we could have said 5 years ago. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. It's a very good point, and it's a unusual synthesis of what Faraz Saab said and what Dr. Khaqan said, where yes, they are illiterate. Female literacy, for example, is very low in our country, but so is male literacy. And at the same time, what Dr. Khaqan is arguing about shu'ur, which is to say that there is a sort of bazaar wisdom exists at the same time. This means that the court of public opinion is conflicted. And like you have correctly mentioned, it is actually difficult to persuade the ordinary voter today with pies in the sky. And therefore you see a reduction in at least two of the parties' wild promises. One seems to go really over the top, but the two of the parties know that at the same time as they make promises for better things, one is focusing on reviving business, the other one is focusing on social protection, but the other two don't make grandiose promises, and at least one of them is actually strongly arguing for austerity. And I think this is very important, because the austerity it's saying is rationalizing government, which is to say that you cannot have public value creation with the size of government because it simply wouldn't be feasible with the taxation base. So at least there is economic thinking imbued in some of the discourse found in the manifestos, and so you're right.
When we talk about grandiose promises, Faraz Saab, do you think when we look at the PPP, what the PPP is saying, and the dream and what they want to, do you think it's more targeted towards perhaps Sindh? Because we've seen, of course, as far as governance is concerned, as far as, of course, also education, of course, is relatively lower if we look at the statistics. I'm not saying that people there don't know what's happening, not at all, but I think that if you look at the statistics, perhaps from Punjab, comparatively, they're lower in that sense.
Well, Mahrukh, the PPP manifesto, the funny part is it's the same as that Sir Bhutto gave.
Okay.
Roti, kapra and makan is the main emphasis on it.
But isn't that always how?
But the point is, you said, can we sell what we were selling 5 years ago? We're still selling it 50 years down the lane.
Okay, fair
it's still selling there. So people in the Sindh are still looking for Roti, Kapra and Makan, the slogan. It still sells. He's promising 2 million houses. He's promising Roti by giving them promises for the jobs. 10 million, 5 million jobs, I guess. And then there's promise for the free electricity. So manifesto is still same.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about the manifesto being targeted to the Sindh,
so what do they mean when they say chuno nahi soch ko?
That's basically to do with the Bilawal, I guess. You even look at the manifesto, you've got a big Bilawal poster over there. Bilawal is the poster boy for PPP right now. So as I was discussing with someone else as well, we're having an election in spring for the offsprings. Okay. So basically Nawaz Sharif has Maryam Nawaz being there. That's the offspring that he would be supporting in this election, and same goes for Zardari.
But if we look at what the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif Saab, he is very much himself the center of the campaign at this time. No, we don't see so much of Zardari Saab though.
Yeah, that's true. But has Zardari Saab ever been in election campaigns so actively? No, he's not there. He's always played his role after election, post-election roles. Well, if you say Nawaz Sharif Sahab has been very actively, so that's wrong. You look at all these.
Although I think that Zardari Sahab did address a rally in Hub today.
Yeah, but not so actively.
Yes.
But if you see the election campaign for the PMLN as well, it's more focused on Maryam Nawaz taking the stage.
But they're saying Pakistan ko Nawaz do. So they're very much saying
Nawaz
bring Nawaz Sharif back. And Nawaz, as far as the PMLN is saying, they're saying that Nawaz Sharif has come for, their narrative is very clear. They're saying Nawaz Sharif has come back for Pakistan, and that Pakistan needs Nawaz.
At least that's the narrative that they're trying to sell.
Yes.
But we've got Bhutto still over there in the narrative.
Right, fair enough. Dr. Khaqan, as far as the preparedness is concerned, when you look at, can you gauge, how prepared all these parties are with regard to governance from the manifestos at all? Or do you think that they're largely documents made to, like I said, appeal to the masses, talk to them, to get the vote rather than anything else?
Mahrukh, I think the most important part is the preparedness part, the team part, a very clear vision of what you want to do in the next 6 months. For example, the job of the finance minister for the next 6 months is so categorically defined. Get the current standby arrangement done, get the IMF program transitioning covered, and get the budget, which is, fiscally responsible and agreeable to the finance of the country, to the people. It helps them get targeted support, and, it's equally comfortable with the IMF. Now, when I say this, and if you go into the manifestos or depth of research that is required, of course, in Pakistan, the missing part, of course, is the economic governance. We're talking about economy, so I'm, mentioning this. And then, who are to be placed in key positions. Whenever countries have, changed changed for the better and changed, categorically, it's whether it's, Manmohan's speech in 91 in India, whether it's, Suharto in Indonesia, or Lee Kuan Yew steering a different Singapore, or Deng Xiaoping in China. The thought process change. We have to agree, right? 3, 4, 5 decades of where Pakistan stands today, the level of poverty. So they've, I'm happy to see that they've mentioned poverty. Everyone recognizes on the World Bank data, the poverty in Pakistan is at 40%. That's 9-10 crore people living, a difficult life. The stunting is high. So of course we have to agree that we as a nation have not been able to deliver for the vast majority of people. And so, they want to 25%.
Dr. Khaqan, I know that you have limited time. I know that you have limited time, but one last question before you have to leave. There is, as far as the PPP is concerned, we fairly have some idea of the economic team when we look at the PMLN, for example. As far as the PPP is concerned, the last 2 finance ministers, unfortunately, I don't think stayed with the PPP. What do you expect? What kind of an economic team do you think, you can expect from the PPP, in your opinion, of course?
I think my opinion is that they have some people. I think Naveed Qamar has been there, Salim Mandviwala Sahab has been there in the finance committee. So they have these internal people. They can always, go externally, find some economists to put and strengthen that team. So that could be done if they want to. They have done a similar thing earlier, but now, these people have also gotten trained. So they can put that mix. Everyone's, but maybe they have not given that kind of clarity, and maybe they should in the coming months or so. In fact, coming weeks, because by March early we should be forming a new government. And that's a good point. Maybe, all the parties should clearly define their team when we get as close. But you also know that there's going to be a coalition government, right? I mean, that's the general vibe that is coming through, whether it's PMLN or PPP or IPP or JUI, everyone's going to be in a coalition, and then the independents. So because so many things are on the open this time, and I think parties are being a bit careful, so I give them that leeway that inside they have decided, but they must work to ensuring that these transitions remain very smooth. The IMF, and then June onwards, they would have to actually do a lot of structural work, whether it's in the FPR, whether it's on the expenditure side, whether it's on the energy side, to get investment structure right. I mean, Pakistan is in serious need of structural change. It
But
is not the consistency.
But you and I are talking about perhaps a coalition government. Do you think structural reform is something that will be doable, will be practical if there's a coalition with independents? Because we are again, if this happens the way you are saying, then we're looking again at an amalgam of people and different parties, independents. It doesn't look like a one man, one party show.
So here are a few good points. Mahrukh, I think everyone's realized, including the political leadership, the establishment, the judiciary, that muddling through is no more an option for Pakistan. Debt, run economy is not an option. People are not even, your best friends are not even willing to give you that kind of money. Without the IMF is not an option for Pakistan. Then the other part is that, there is one framework that PDM itself set up. It's called the SIFC. It's a whole of government approach. At least they are going to be still there as a body to coordinate, to hopefully implement, to push through. So that framework would be there. The actual part that has gone missing here is, and I still keep emphasizing, is where is the professional setup in all this? You have a generalist system, and then you bring in a political layer on it. But where is the professional team which has to change energy, which has to negotiate with the IMF, which has to have a growth framework? Maybe you should have a growth commission in Pakistan. What I'm trying to say is that part is still missing in the whole discourse. Without that part, I think even framing these policies into, let's say you want to implement a cheaper electricity for, 100 or 200 units. So there is a way to do it. It's not, out of the ordinary that you just can't do it. You can, issue an energy card through the income support program. The provinces share largely the burden. The the federal government puts something. So maybe you can subsidize there. Maybe you can, finance a solar roof for them. These are very small houses. It will not be a big expenditure. Some financing through the bank, some help there by the federal. Everything is doable, but it is the professional discourse which I still think is missing from the discussion on the political party side as well. And I think within the setup in the government, that has not taken root. And let's hope that such a thing happens, then all these things can be put in process. Pakistan could start looking at least more stable, some growth, some new jobs, some better exports, and some energy prices maybe not rising that exponentially. I think that's the kind of picture we can paint.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaqan. Thank you for joining us. Ji, Faraz Sahab, do you agree with what Dr. Khaqan is saying? Because if we are looking at, again, if we are looking at a government that's going to be a coalition one with independence, with, then we are looking at, again, we talk about austerity also, with the cabinet size, that all of those things are again going to become an issue, no?
Okay. Well, Mahrukh, the point is where preparedness comes in. We already know the faces that will be governing us. We know which ministry will go to whom. It's just a few changes that we'd see, whether it's PPP or PMLN or a coalition. The major chunk will go there. But the size of the cabinet will again be very, very large. That is something bad.
So where does austerity go?
Well, it just stays in the manifesto.
Okay.
And in the paper. Well, coming back to the preparedness and the seriousness about economy, I want to add a few things. Number one, with electricity, everybody's talking about free electricity, but nobody's talking about discourse. They need to be privatized if you want to do the recovery and theft.
I think the PMLN has clearly said that they will go for privatization.
But they have not said how would they implement it. Where is the privatization of PIA, steel mill, and there are so many large corporations, government corporation. If you add them up, just 3 corporations, if you add them up, the steel mill, PIA and another one, the loss that accumulates is around 100 billion rupees. That's more than what we are asking for different places.
But Usman sir, don't all major political parties largely agree on this as far as privatization is concerned, as far as the white elephants and that whole debate? Haven't we done it? Haven't we agreed on it? Because the PDM also, was an amalgam of 11 major political parties, and they agreed on the economic realities at the time. They agreed on what had to be done, and this probably is one of those things. Isn't that true?
I think that's a fair point, that just because the manifesto doesn't mention doesn't mean that it isn't already in place. And we have to give credit to the caretaker government as well. And one advantage of having this caretaker government being so serious and professional has been that they have carried things out without any need for sloganeering. In fact, they have not really worked very hard on seeking the people's approval, but rather continued things as they would have been done under the IMF.
But there has been that people's approval, cautious at first, but mostly, there is that agreement that they've done a good job.
That is correct. So the people seem to be expressing a satisfaction with how a lot of important things are being done. Of course, the work at hand is complex and it needs more time. And so we have to give some credit to the caretaker government for working so hard and for working towards economic revival. So whomsoever comes into power, and as has been correctly suggested, likely suggested, that there will be a coalition thing, well, your argument is very solid in that since the PDM has been working together, they have intra-party agreements and bargains that can be in the national interest. It's possible, and so you don't need to mention in the manifesto per se to put things on course, yes.
But Faraz Sahab, it probably will be more difficult for a coalition rather than a single, one party leading, of course. We agree with that. Because, of course, this election looks like, the phenomena of independence also, is going to be one of those things. And the pressure of it on a government and, what that may mean for whichever government then is in power is also something that's relevant in this scenario, no?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting situation after that. If all these independent people who win on the seats of PTI and they join the government ranks, then the street power will rest with PTI, the government will be with PMLN, and it's going to be.
But of course, the independents may join. We don't know. The independents may very well join your parties in power. There's no way of knowing. I mean, mostly that happens.
You're right. They might join, but whatever Bilawal Bhutto has said, whatever different political parties, their representatives are saying, it's the general perception is that they will be banking on the independents to join them and form a government. So there would be a very important role.
So that's what I'm saying. So there will be an important group which will have its own bargaining power, and that itself will mean, to the cost of whatever is happening.
Yes. It has to go with the cost of the taxpayer. They would definitely want their share in government via ministries, via SAPMs, and via advisors, and that eventually will cost the taxpayer.
Right. Usman Sahab, I also want to go into we have little time left to talk about what Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is saying. He's talking about a debate, a televised debate, while that is a tradition elsewhere all over the world. It's something that hasn't been done, and we've seen a reaction also from the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Sahab when he says that the political atmosphere shouldn't be fueled in this manner. And perhaps, there should be an agreement. He talks about the Charter of Democracy, to which, of course, we've had a response from Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. How do you look at that?
It's a very interesting point. There is a pro and a con to this. The pro is that if you recall the Kennedy debate in 1960, where this tradition really started, it was radio before that. When it happened, Kennedy won a lot of favor because he was charismatic and well-spoken, and it shifted things in his favor. So a cult of that's the con. The cult of personality then becomes far more prominent, and so whoever is a better salesman can gain more of an approval rating than they might otherwise deserve based on the technocratic abilities. And so I don't want that to be a part of our political system insofar as they are dynastic by nature anyways. So we have shaped, democracy is not just about people voting in an election, but also the parties having democratic systems within them so that you have more people rise up. But since South Asia, this is not just us, but South Asia generally has a dynastic cult of personality, this is very negative, and so it doesn't really matter to me who is in that debate, rather the merits of changing a society, because improving our society now is a question of making unpleasant decisions and making difficult choices. And on that stage, on that podium, and happens in America too, it's very hard to persuade the people that we will have to give the sacrifices that we actually will have to give.
But also, are we talking about a different kind of audience?
Yes, I mean that actually the parameters of the debate will matter a lot. You're making a very important point there. Which language will it be in? What sort of time will each person be given? What sorts of questions will be posed by the moderator? These things matter a lot. And if you recall that the Trump debate in 2016, there was a lot of abuse and there was a lot of a bad, what we call in Urdu, a badmazgi, a bad taste existed. And so that thing can easily be hijacked. So setting the rules of the game, if we do have a debate, will matter a lot.
Faraz, there's also Punjab Sindh, now of course this kind of dialogue which we've seen between the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. He's, because Shehbaz Sharif Saab has clearly said that, our work in Punjab speaks for what we've done, what we plan to do, the past also, and that is very much part of their political, part of their manifesto, what they are saying. Even Maryam Nawaz, she says that, our manifesto is the roads, our manifesto is the motorway, look at those, and that is what, we are talking, that is what we are selling to the people, that is what we are appealing from the masses. As far as Sindh is concerned, when Shehbaz Sharif Saab says that, let's look at Sindh. How do you look at that debate? I think it's very interesting between him and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari.
Well, Mahrukh, see, the debate having, I just want to add a point to it.
Please.
Well, that debate happening on the TV, I don't think there's any harm to it. If the leaders, they show strain and they listen to each other. We had recently incident over there in KPK where the chairman PTI, Gohar Khan Saab, was leading a rally and ANP leader Baba Khan was crossing him. They both stopped their cars, the leaders, they got off their cars and they greeted each other. Now if you look at the social media campaign after that, it took a very, very positive response. With PTI support workers and supporters were actually congratulating the ANP people for that. So if we have some sort of good dialogue.
You're saying that it means more transparency in a sense.
That's another point. My point is if they can see actually Gohar Khan, let's say PTI people, top leadership, Gohar Khan, Chairman Bilawal Bhutto, and let's say if not Nawaz Sharif, Shehbaz Sharif sitting on a table, they're discussing things sanely and listening to each other, that might just create a very positive atmosphere.
But I don't think, at this time we don't know, but it doesn't seem like it's going to go towards that kind of a debate.
Well, if we don't expect that from our own leaders, then how can we expect from the workers?
Fair enough, but it doesn't look like, practically speaking, it doesn't look like it's going to go towards that kind of debate. But at this time, the debate that's happening, the dialogue, let's not say the debate between the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, between Punjab development versus Sindh, how do you respond to that?
There's no doubt about it. The Punjab, when it comes to development, if you've got metros and all these things given to the almost common man for the Punjab. There's a promise for the metro in Faisalabad, which was very much over there in the cards. They have given that as well. So as far as development is concerned, Sindh has to still do miles for that. They need a lot of time to cover up that.
Usman Saab, do you think it's because, do you think the PMLN largely feels that with the past experience of governance with, for example, the PTI, also, earlier perhaps PPP, at this time they feel that they are the strongest party because in terms of how the economy was doing when they were in power, in terms of, like I said, the development in infrastructure, they have those things to sell to the people.
Yes, there is that advantage. They have a lot of competent people in their party who can drive this, but that is also at the same time a sleight of hand. And the sleight of hand is that the development model in Pakistan, particularly after 1972, has been driven by consumption. This is particularly true after the 90s. And so you and I, the three of us actually sitting together, can overinflate consumption in Pakistan, and it would come through importing a lot of things based on debt from the IMF, and we can make the GDP look artificially good. But in fact what we need is the structural reform that all of us have said previously, and that requires actually investment driven stuff. So actually, yes, the track record is good, but Pakistan's economic model itself cannot be a consumption fueled import based thing, and so the deeper inquiry is not something, unfortunately, that young people or the public at large are aware of, and so we have to look critically at what the development assumptions are for the country when we look at quote, good track records.
But at this time, from what they can say to the people at this time, Faraz Saab, as far as, other than politicking is concerned, when you look at the graph, and if there is, like we say, a coalition government, then of course, by and large, again, like I said, there is agreement on those structural reforms. There is agreement on, perhaps, Nawaz Sharif Saab, I think, said a good thing when he said that, the prime ministers of this country have not been allowed to complete their terms ever, and this is part of their, the changes in Articles 61, 62, those changes, and I think by and large there will be agreement on political parties on these core issues.
Well, the agreements have always been there. Every government that comes, they want to privatize, but the point is, do they privatize? No, they don't. PIA has been on cards for privatization.
You're saying the pressure of
30 years. So the point is, if you say there's an understanding, yes, there has been understanding. They know how important it is, but can they actually do it? I still doubt. They won't. The problem is with the votes and that eyewash that they want for their own voters. If they go for privatization for PIA, let's say, or Pakistan Steel Mill, do you think they'll be getting votes again from the same people? They won't. That is where the people, all these political parties, they stop.
But when
and I think the coalition government, the PDM government that they had, the caretaker government, that the caretaker does not have a mandate for it, actually the problem is. But the PDM was this golden chance where they could have actually gone for it without anyone blaming the other party for it.
But now, if there is an amalgam, if there is a coalition government, Usman Saab will also take on this, there is a coalition government, if there's by and large agreement that they have to pay that political cost and it will be divided among the main political parties, then perhaps we will see a step in that direction, no?
Yes, that's a very solid argument, but it is premised on one thing, and I hope it is true, is that there won't be blame shifting, because having a coalition government has an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that together a common price can be paid to make tough things in the better national, greater national interest. The con is that in some countries, this is not so true for Pakistan, but it's particularly true for other developing countries, that blame shifting happens in coalition arrangements where then nobody takes the responsibility, and it speaks to what Faraz Saab just said. Nobody then takes that head on, and instead passes that those were part of our system and so they didn't take the tough choice.
And we're seeing a little bit of that already happening.
Yeah, we'll be seeing it. Happening with the Bilawals, yes,
because
he's already putting the blame to the people. But when we talk about it, I think Bilawal put to forget that he was the person who was enjoying all that from the government money. He was taking the foreign trips, he was going to different places, and
which is what the PMLN is saying. They're
when
saying
it
that
came
he
to
was
IMF agreement, he took the credit for it. That I was the person who got this IMF agreement.
But of course, when during the elections, then of course, every party is going to contest against each other, and they will have this. But by and large, what kind of a shape do you expect? Now that we're very close, nearly less than 2 weeks away from the day.
Well, the government definitely is going to be driven by the independents.
Okay.
They will be in more power than the actual political party. That is going to be the more negotiating term. They'll get the better piece of the cake.
And they will decide which party to join. And
that's what I'm saying. They'll get the better piece of the cake.
But of course, governance will be another matter entirely. Thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb. Thank you for being with us, Usman Chohan. Thank you for joining us, Faraz Ali Khan. Thank you for being with us today. When we talk about manifestos, of course, there's a reality of politicking, and that is certainly there. But then, on the other hand, there's also a cognizance by all political parties, the reality of the challenges being faced by the common man. And that is a welcome step. Of course, preparedness and how prepared each party is for governance has become an issue in the past. And let's hope that whenever and whoever comes into power is prepared for the challenges of governance. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.